Yo, real talk, have you ever felt like no matter what you achieve there's still this gnarly emptiness inside you that just won't quit? Like you could literally have everything, power, knowledge, respect, and still feel totally hollow inside? That's the vibe we're diving into today with Orochimaru, and dude, it hits different. This snake-obsessed villain from Naruto isn't just some creepy bad guy collecting bodies like Pokemon cards. Nah, he's way deeper than that. Orochimaru represents something we've all felt at some point, that terrifying realization that maybe what we're chasing won't actually fill the void. He literally pursued immortality, became one of the most powerful shinobi ever, mastered jutsu that would make other ninjas lose their minds, and still, dude couldn't find peace. That's low-key heartbreaking when you think about it. So if you've ever felt like you're running on empty no matter how hard you grind, or if you've wondered why success sometimes feels so meaningless, stick around fam, because we're about to break down the psychology behind why Orochimaru's story is actually your story, and why understanding his emptiness might just help you fill yours. Before we go deeper into this psychological rabbit hole, do me a solid real quick. Smash that subscribe button and drop a like on this video. Here's why you absolutely don't want to miss out. If you're vibing with this breakdown of Orochimaru's emptiness, imagine having access to deep dives on every complex anime character that mirrors your own struggles and growth. We're talking about understanding yourself better through the stories you already love. This channel is all about connecting anime psychology to your real life, helping you make sense of those feelings you can't always put into words. Plus, when you subscribe, you're telling YouTube to keep showing you this kind of content that actually matters instead of just random clickbait garbage. So yeah, hit that button, leave a like, and let's keep this journey going together. Trust me, you're gonna want to stick around for what's coming next about how Orochimaru's quest for immortality is actually a masterclass in what happens when we run from our deepest fears. Alright, let's get into the heavy stuff. Orochimaru's whole deal starts way before he became the creepy snake dude we all know. This guy was actually hella talented from the jump, like prodigy level talented. He was part of the legendary Sannin alongside Jiraiya and Tsunade, trained directly under the third Hokage, and was basically destined for greatness. But here's where things get psychologically gnarly. Orochimaru witnessed death at a super young age when his parents died during a war, and that trauma basically rewired his entire brain. In psychology, we call this a core wound, an emotional injury so deep that it shapes literally every decision you make for the rest of your life. For Orochimaru, that core wound was the terror of mortality, the absolute horror of losing people and eventually losing himself to the void of death. So what did he do? He became obsessed with finding a way to escape it. Now, on the surface, wanting to avoid death seems pretty normal, right? Like nobody's out here trying to die. But Orochimaru took it to a whole other level. His fear wasn't just about dying, it was about the meaninglessness that comes with it. If we all just die anyway, what's the point of anything? This is straight up existential dread, which is when you start questioning the entire purpose of existence because you're hyper-aware that nothing lasts forever. Philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus wrote entire books about this feeling, and Orochimaru is basically living it out in the Naruto universe. The dude couldn't cope with the idea that all his knowledge, all his power, all his achievements would just vanish when he died. So he decided, nah fam, I'm gonna beat death itself. But here's the psychological trap he fell into, and this is where it connects to so many of us. Orochimaru started using achievement as a defense mechanism against his core fear. Every jutsu he mastered, every forbidden technique he learned, every experiment he conducted, it was all a desperate attempt to feel like he had control over the uncontrollable. This is called compensatory behavior in psychology. It's when you try to fix an internal emotional problem by achieving external things. You see this everywhere in real life. People who feel unlovable might chase relationships constantly. People who feel powerless might obsess over getting rich or famous. People who feel empty might grind themselves to death trying to achieve more and more, hoping that the next accomplishment will finally make them feel whole. Spoiler alert, it never does. And Orochimaru is the ultimate example of this. The man literally achieved immortality through his living corpse reincarnation technique, where he could transfer his soul into new bodies and keep living forever. He got exactly what he wanted. But did it fill the void? Did it bring him peace? Absolutely not. Because here's the brutal truth that Orochimaru had to face, and that we all have to face eventually. External achievements cannot heal internal wounds. You can become the most successful person in the world, have all the money, all the power, all the respect, and still feel completely empty inside if you haven't dealt with your core emotional pain. Orochimaru's obsession with immortality was never really about living forever. It was about avoiding the painful reality of his own emotional emptiness. As long as he was busy experimenting, planning, scheming, and achieving, He didn't have to sit with that gnarly feeling of meaninglessness that haunted him since childhood. This is what psychologists call avoidance coping. Instead of facing your pain, you stay busy, you chase goals, you distract yourself with achievements. It feels productive, it feels like you're doing something important, but really you're just running from yourself. And the scariest part? The more you run, the emptier you feel. Because deep down, you know you're avoiding the real issue. You know that no amount of success is gonna fix what's broken inside. Orochimaru knew this too, even if he couldn't admit it. You can see it in the way he keeps changing bodies, keeps searching for new techniques, keeps pushing boundaries. He's never satisfied because satisfaction isn't actually his goal, distraction is. As long as he's chasing immortality, he doesn't have to confront the existential terror that started this whole journey. Now let's talk about another psychological layer here, the shadow self. Carl Jung, this legendary psychologist, talked about how we all have parts of ourselves that we reject and push into our unconscious mind. These rejected parts become our shadow, all the traits, feelings, and desires we don't want to acknowledge. For Orochimaru, his shadow included his vulnerability, his fear, his need for genuine connection. He saw these things as weaknesses, so he rejected them completely and embraced their opposites. Cold logic, ruthless ambition, total self-reliance. But here's the thing about shadow work. Whatever you reject in yourself doesn't just disappear. It grows stronger in the darkness and starts controlling you from behind the scenes. Orochimaru thought he was becoming stronger by cutting off his emotions and connections, but really he was just becoming more empty and controlled by the very fear he was trying to escape. His obsession with Sasuke is a perfect example of this. On the surface, Orochimaru wanted Sasuke's body because of the Sharingan and his Uchiha genetics. But psychologically there's something deeper going on. Sasuke represented everything Orochimaru had lost or rejected. Youth, potential, the ability to form genuine bonds, a sense of purpose beyond just survival. By taking Sasuke's body, Orochimaru wasn't just gaining power. He was unconsciously trying to reclaim the parts of himself he'd abandoned. It's like he was trying to steal back his own humanity through someone else, which is low-key tragic when you really think about it. This connects to something called projection in psychology, where you see in others what you can't see in yourself. Orochimaru projected all his rejected humanity onto Sasuke and then tried to literally consume it. But just like you can't fix internal problems with external achievements, you can't reclaim your lost self by stealing someone else's identity. The void remained no matter how many bodies he took. And this is where Orochimaru becomes a mirror for so many of us. How many times have you tried to fill your emptiness by becoming someone else? By copying someone's lifestyle, their success, their personality, thinking that if you could just be like them, you'd finally feel complete? It doesn't work because the emptiness isn't about what you lack externally, it's about what you've rejected internally. Until you face your shadow, accept your vulnerabilities, and deal with your core wounds, no achievement or transformation is gonna make you feel whole. Yo, hold up real quick, I wanna hear from you. What are you thinking so far? Does this hit home for you? Drop a comment below and let me know. Have you ever felt like Orochimaru, chasing something external to fill an internal void? Maybe you've grinded so hard for success that you forgot why you started in the first place? Or maybe you know someone going through this right now, pushing themselves to the breaking point trying to outrun their own pain? Share your story with us, fam. Your experience matters, and honestly, reading your comments helps me understand what kind of content resonates with you so I can keep bringing these deep dives that actually make a difference in your life. Plus, other people in the community might read your comment and realize they're not alone in what they're feeling. So yeah, take a second, drop your thoughts below. We're building something real here and your voice is part of that. And yo, stick with me till the end of this video because what comes next is gonna blow your mind. We're about to uncover the moment where Orochimaru reached his absolute point of no return, and trust me, the psychological implications are insane. You don't want to miss this. Alright fam, we've reached the most critical part of Orochimaru's psychological journey, and this is where everything we've talked about comes together in the most devastating way possible. There's this moment in everyone's life, whether they realize it or not, where they cross a line that fundamentally changes who they are. Psychologists call this a point of no return. It's when you make a choice or series of choices that are so extreme, so far removed from your core values, that you can never fully come back from them. For Orochimaru, this point wasn't just one moment, it was a gradual descent into darker and darker territory until he looked in the mirror one day and didn't recognize the person staring back. But here's the thing that makes this so psychologically fascinating and terrifying. Orochimaru didn't wake up one day and decide to become a monster. Nobody ever does. It happened incrementally, one compromise at a time, one rationalization at a time, one step further into the darkness at a time. This is how most people lose themselves, not through one big dramatic choice, but through 1,000 small ones that each seem justifiable in the moment. First, Orochimaru started experimenting on animals. Not that bad, right? It's for science, for knowledge, for progress. Then he moved to experimenting on prisoners, people whose society had already deemed disposable. Still able to rationalize it, they were criminals anyway and the knowledge gained could save lives. Then it escalated to kidnapping innocent villagers, to experimenting on children, to creating an entire hidden village dedicated to his twisted research. Each step felt like a logical continuation of the last, but looking back, the distance traveled was absolutely massive. This psychological phenomenon is called the slippery slope, and it's how good people end up doing terrible things. You don't jump off a cliff. You slide down a slope so gradually that you don't notice how far you've fallen until it's too late to climb back up. And here's what's really messed up. The more Orochimaru invested in this path, the harder it became to turn back. In psychology, we call this the sunk cost fallacy. He'd sacrificed so much. His relationships, his humanity, his place in the village, his moral compass, that admitting it was all for nothing would have been psychologically unbearable. So he doubled down, went deeper, convinced himself that the end would justify the means, that eventually all this suffering would lead to the ultimate knowledge, the ultimate power, the ultimate escape from death. But that moment never came. The goalpost kept moving further away because the goal itself was impossible. You can't achieve internal peace through external destruction. You can't fill a spiritual void with physical power. You can't heal emotional wounds by inflicting them on others. Orochimaru's point of no return is especially tragic because you can see moments where he almost turned back. His interactions with the third Hokage, his former teacher, show glimpses of the person he used to be. There's this psychological concept called cognitive dissonance, which is the mental discomfort you feel when your actions don't align with your beliefs or self-image. Orochimaru definitely experienced this. Part of him still remembered being the promising young ninja who wanted to protect the village, who had friends and a teacher who believed in him. But that part of him was in direct conflict with what he'd become. A ruthless experimenter who saw humans as disposable test subjects. The psychological pain of this dissonance was probably enormous, and Orochimaru had two choices: either change his behavior to match his values, or change his values to match his behavior. Guess which one he chose? He reconstructed his entire moral framework to justify his actions. He convinced himself that morality was a weakness, that attachment was a flaw, that his pursuit of knowledge transcended petty human concerns about right and wrong. This is called moral disengagement, and it's how people commit atrocities while still sleeping at night. They don't see themselves as evil, they see themselves as beyond conventional morality, operating on a higher plane where the rules don't apply. Orochimaru literally rewrote his psychology to avoid the pain of admitting what he'd become. But here's the absolutely brutal truth that Orochimaru had to face eventually. You can change your beliefs, but you can't change your fundamental human need for meaning, connection, and purpose. Deep down, beneath all the rationalizations and reconstructed values, Orochimaru was still that scared kid who watched his parents die and decided he would never be powerless again. All the experiments, all the bodies, all the forbidden jutsu, none of it addressed that core wound. If anything, it made it worse because now he wasn't just afraid of death, he was also carrying the weight of all the lives he'd destroyed in his futile attempt to escape it. The point of no return isn't just about the actions you take, it's about the person you become in the process. Orochimaru transformed himself so completely that even if he wanted to go back, there was no back to go to. The innocent boy he once was had been completely consumed by the monster he'd created. And that's the real horror of his story, not that he became evil, but that he became so disconnected from his humanity that he couldn't find his way back even when he wanted to. You see this play out in the 4th Shinobi World War arc, where Orochimaru is resurrected and has this moment of clarity. He's seen the consequences of his actions, he's been defeated, humiliated, forced to confront the fact that his quest for immortality didn't bring him anything but emptiness. And what does he do? He doesn't have some dramatic redemption arc where everything's forgiven. Nah, it's way more psychologically realistic than that. He kinda just exists. He's still Orochimaru, still obsessed with jutsu and experimentation, but there's this haunted quality to him now, like he knows he's gone too far to ever truly come back but he's too invested to stop completely. It's this weird psychological limbo where he's aware of his emptiness but doesn't know how to fill it, aware of his mistakes but doesn't know how to atone for them, aware that immortality didn't solve anything but doesn't have another goal to pursue. This is what the point of no return really looks like. Not some dramatic moment of realization and change, but a quiet acceptance that you've become someone you never intended to be and now you have to live with that forever. And this connects to something really important about how we construct our identities. Orochimaru's entire sense of self became wrapped up in his pursuit of immortality and forbidden knowledge. When that pursuit proved hollow, he experienced what's called identity foreclosure, a state where your identity is so rigidly defined by one thing that losing it or having it fail leaves you psychologically adrift. Imagine spending decades, centuries even, defining yourself as the person who will conquer death, who will master all jutsu, who will transcend human limitations. Then you realize none of that brought you fulfillment. Now what? Who are you without that pursuit? Orochimaru couldn't answer that question because he'd erased every other aspect of himself in service of his obsession. He had no hobbies, no genuine relationships, no values beyond his research, no identity beyond his quest. The point of no return stripped him of everything except the empty shell of his ambition, and that shell was all he had left to hold on to. This is the danger of making any single thing your entire identity, whether it's your career, your achievements, your physical appearance, your relationships, whatever. When that one thing fails or proves insufficient, you're left with nothing, and rebuilding an identity from scratch is one of the hardest psychological challenges there is. What makes Orochimaru's story even more complex is that he did kind of attempt some form of change later on. He helped during the war, he let Sasuke go, he shifted from actively destructive to passively observant. But here's the thing, that wasn't redemption. That was resignation. There's a huge psychological difference between genuine change and just giving up on your previous goals. Orochimaru didn't heal his core wound. He just stopped actively trying to fill it. He didn't reconnect with his humanity, he just accepted its absence. He didn't find meaning, he just stopped looking for it. That's not growth, that's surrender. And maybe that's the most realistic portrayal of someone who's gone past their point of no return. Not everyone gets a redemption arc. Not everyone finds their way back. Sometimes you just have to live with what you've become and try to do less harm going forward. Orochimaru represents that uncomfortable truth that not all damage can be undone, not all choices can be reversed, not all people can be saved. Sometimes the void wins. Sometimes immortality is just an extended prison sentence where you're trapped with the person you've become. Sometimes the emptiness never gets filled, it just gets accommodated. Now let's dig into the most devastating part of Orochimaru's psychology, the moment when everything he built started crumbling from the inside out, and honestly, this is where his story gets super real for anyone who's ever pushed themselves to the breaking point. See, Orochimaru didn't just pursue immortality casually. This dude went all in. He abandoned his village, betrayed his teammates, conducted horrific experiments on innocent people, transformed his own body into something barely human, and basically sacrificed every shred of his humanity on the altar of his obsession. And for what? To escape death? Nah fam, it goes way deeper than that. What Orochimaru was really doing was constructing an elaborate psychological defense system to protect himself from ever feeling vulnerable again. In psychology, we call this a false self. It's like building a fake persona that seems strong and invincible on the outside, but inside there's just this terrified kid who never processed their trauma. The false self is exhausting to maintain because it requires constant vigilance. You can never let your guard down, never show weakness, never admit that you're scared or hurting. Orochimaru lived this way for decades, and you can see the toll it took on him. His body literally started falling apart because he was using forbidden jutsu that were destroying him from the inside. This is such a powerful metaphor for what happens when you ignore your emotional health. Eventually, your body keeps the score, as trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk would say. You can't just suppress your pain forever without consequences. Orochimaru's deteriorating bodies weren't just a plot device. They were a physical manifestation of his internal collapse. Every time he had to switch bodies, it was like his psyche screaming that this path wasn't sustainable, that you can't outrun your humanity forever without paying a price. But here's where it gets even more psychologically intense. Orochimaru's relationships, or complete lack thereof. This man had zero genuine connections. Kabuto was basically just a tool he manipulated. His subordinates feared him but didn't respect or love him. Even his obsession with Sasuke wasn't really about Sasuke as a person. It was about what Sasuke represented. Orochimaru had become so disconnected from authentic human connection that he literally saw people as objects, as vessels, as means to an end. This is what psychologists call depersonalization, and it's one of the most tragic consequences of unhealed trauma. When you've been hurt so deeply, sometimes your brain tries to protect you by numbing you out, by making you see the world as cold and mechanical rather than warm and relational. It feels safer to not care, to not attach, to not need anyone. But the irony is brutal. In trying to protect yourself from the pain of loss, you lose access to the very thing that makes life meaningful: genuine human connection. Orochimaru achieved immortality but lost everything that makes being alive worthwhile. He could live forever but he had nothing worth living for. That's the definition of existential emptiness right there. And this connects to something called the hedonic treadmill in psychology. It's this idea that no matter what you achieve or acquire, you quickly adapt to it and return to your baseline level of happiness or unhappiness. Orochimaru kept reaching new levels of power, kept achieving impossible things, but none of it ever satisfied him because he was trying to solve an emotional problem with intellectual and physical solutions. It's like trying to quench your thirst by eating food, you're addressing the wrong need. What Orochimaru really needed wasn't more power or longer life. He needed to grieve his parents. He needed to process his fear of death. He needed to accept his vulnerability and reconnect with his humanity. But that would have required him to feel the very pain he'd spent his entire life running from, and that scared him more than any enemy ever could. This is the trap that so many high achievers fall into, and maybe you can relate to this. You keep grinding, keep pushing, keep achieving, telling yourself that the next milestone will finally bring you peace. But it never does because you're avoiding the real work, the internal emotional work of healing your wounds and accepting yourself fully, including the parts you've rejected. Orochimaru's internal collapse really shows itself in his increasingly desperate and erratic behavior throughout the series. When Sasuke betrayed him and took over his body instead of the other way around, Orochimaru didn't just lose a vessel. He lost the illusion of control that he'd been clinging to. For someone whose entire identity was built on mastery and control, this was psychologically devastating. It exposed the truth he'd been avoiding, that despite all his power, he was still just as powerless against the fundamental uncertainties of existence as everyone else. This moment represents what we call in psychology a narcissistic injury, when your inflated self-image gets punctured by reality and you have to face the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. For Orochimaru, this gap was massive. He saw himself as beyond human limitations, as someone who had transcended the petty concerns of mortality and emotion. But Sasuke's betrayal proved that he was still vulnerable, still capable of being outmaneuvered, still subject to forces beyond his control. And that realization absolutely wrecked him on a psychological level. Another layer to Orochimaru's internal collapse is what Jung called the inflation of the ego. When you achieve great things, especially if you do it by yourself without genuine relationships to keep you grounded, your ego can become massively inflated. You start believing you're special, chosen, above the rules that apply to everyone else. Orochimaru definitely fell into this trap. He thought he was smart enough to hack the system, to cheat death, to rise above human limitations. But inflation always leads to deflation eventually, and when it comes, it's brutal. The higher you've built yourself up, the harder you fall. And Orochimaru fell hard, multiple times, because he refused to build his life on a foundation of authentic self-worth rather than achievement and power. Here's something really important to understand about Orochimaru's psychology. His obsession with knowledge and jutsu wasn't actually about learning for its own sake. It was about control. If he could know everything, master everything, then maybe he could finally feel safe. This is called intellectualization in psychology, using your brain to avoid your heart. Smart people do this all the time. They analyze, theorize, research, and study as a way to feel in control of situations that are actually emotionally overwhelming. Orochimaru intellectualized his fear of death into a scientific problem to be solved, but death isn't just a scientific problem. It's an emotional and existential reality that requires acceptance, not solutions. By treating it as merely a technical challenge, Orochimaru avoided dealing with the grief, fear, and vulnerability that death brings up. And that avoidance is what ultimately hollowed him out from the inside. The internal collapse continued because Orochimaru was living in constant contradiction. He wanted to transcend humanity, but he was driven by very human fears. He wanted to escape vulnerability, but his desperation revealed just how vulnerable he felt. He wanted to be beyond emotions, but his obsession with Sasuke showed how emotionally invested he still was in external validation. These contradictions created massive psychological tension that had nowhere to go, so it turned inward and ate him alive. This is what happens when you live in denial of your true self. You become fragmented, split between who you're pretending to be and who you actually are, and that split is psychologically agonizing. So here we are, at the end of Orochimaru's psychological journey, and honestly, it's one of the most haunting character studies in anime because it doesn't give us the satisfaction of closure. Orochimaru's story doesn't end with redemption or destruction. It ends with him still existing, still carrying that void, still wearing the scar of a life spent running from himself. And that scar? It never closes. That's the part that hits different when you really sit with it. We live in a culture that loves transformation stories, right? We love the idea that anyone can change, that it's never too late, that redemption is always possible. And while that's beautiful and sometimes true, Orochimaru's story forces us to confront a darker reality. Some wounds cut so deep that they fundamentally alter who you are, and no amount of time or achievement can fully heal them. The psychological term for this is complex trauma. It's trauma that's so severe and prolonged that it changes your personality structure, your worldview, your ability to connect with others. Orochimaru's complex trauma started with his parents' death and was compounded by every choice he made afterward to avoid dealing with that original pain. By the time he realized what he'd done to himself, the scar tissue was so thick that the original wound was barely visible anymore. But it was still there, underneath everything, still driving his behavior, still shaping his reality. And here's what makes this so psychologically relevant to all of us. We all carry scars that won't fully close. Maybe not as extreme as Orochimaru's, but scars nonetheless. Maybe it's childhood trauma that still affects your relationships. Maybe it's a failure that shattered your confidence and you've never fully rebuilt it. Maybe it's a loss that left a hole in your life that nothing has been able to fill. These scars become part of who we are, and the question isn't whether they'll ever completely disappear. They won't, but rather how will we live with them? Will we let them define us like Orochimaru did, building our entire existence around avoiding the pain? Or will we acknowledge them, learn from them, and integrate them into a fuller, more authentic version of ourselves? Orochimaru chose the first path, and it cost him everything that makes life worth living. His immortality became a curse rather than a blessing because he was immortally trapped with an unhealed version of himself. Imagine that for a second. Living forever but never growing, never healing, never finding peace. That's not immortality, that's hell. And the gnarliest part is that Orochimaru created that hell himself through his own choices. Nobody forced him down this path. He had opportunities to turn back, to choose differently, to face his pain instead of running from it. But each time, the fear was stronger than the courage, the emptiness was louder than the possibility of connection, the illusion of control was more appealing than the reality of vulnerability. This is the invisible cliffhanger that Orochimaru's story leaves us with. The recognition that we're all making these same choices every single day on a smaller scale. Every time we choose achievement over authenticity, control over connection, avoidance over acceptance, we're walking down Orochimaru's path. We might not end up experimenting on people or switching bodies, but we do end up building lives that look successful on the outside while feeling empty on the inside. We do end up becoming versions of ourselves that we don't fully recognize. We do end up carrying scars that never quite close because we never gave them the chance to heal properly. So what's the lesson here? What do we take away from Orochimaru's psychological tragedy? It's not that we should avoid ambition or stop pursuing our goals. It's that we need to be brutally honest about why we're pursuing them. Are you chasing success because it genuinely aligns with your values and brings you fulfillment? Or are you chasing it to fill a void, to prove something, to avoid dealing with deeper emotional pain? Are your achievements building you up or helping you hide? Are you becoming more yourself or less yourself in the pursuit of your goals? These are uncomfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Orochimaru never asked them until it was too late, and by then he built an entire identity around the avoidance. Don't let that be your story. The beautiful and terrifying thing about being human is that we have agency. We can choose differently. We can face our core wounds instead of running from them. We can pursue achievements without making them our entire identity. We can accept our mortality and our limitations without letting them paralyze us with fear. We can build genuine connections even though they make us vulnerable to loss. We can live authentically even though it's harder than hiding behind false success. Orochimaru couldn't do these things or wouldn't do these things, and his story serves as a powerful warning about what happens when we prioritize everything except our own emotional healing and authentic self-expression. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Orochimaru is still out there in the Naruto universe, still existing with his unsolved emptiness, still carrying his unclosed scars. And in a weird way, that's the most realistic ending possible. Because in real life, not every story gets wrapped up neatly. Not every character finds redemption. Not every wound heals completely. Sometimes people just continue existing with their pain, doing slightly less harm than before but never fully addressing the core issue. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the point isn't always complete healing or perfect redemption. Maybe sometimes the point is just awareness, knowing what you're carrying, understanding how it affects you, making conscious choices about how you engage with your pain rather than letting it control you unconsciously. Orochimaru eventually reached a point where he stopped actively destroying others to fill his void, and while that's not redemption, it's something. It's harm reduction. It's a small step toward being slightly less controlled by his trauma. And for some people, in some situations, that might be the most realistic goal. Not complete healing but conscious management. Not total transformation but incremental improvement. Not closing the scar completely, but learning to live with it in a way that causes less damage to yourself and others. So as we close out this deep dive into Orochimaru's psychology, I want you to sit with this uncomfortable truth. The void that Orochimaru carries, that emptiness that even immortality couldn't silence, it exists in all of us to some degree. The difference is what we choose to do about it. Do we face it or flee from it? Do we fill it with genuine meaning or temporary distractions? Do we let it define us or do we integrate it into a larger, more complex understanding of who we are? These choices matter more than any achievement, any power, any success you could possibly attain. Because at the end of the day, at the end of your life, whether that's in 50 years or 500 years, if you somehow achieve Orochimaru's immortality, the only thing that really matters is whether you lived authentically, whether you faced your pain with courage, whether you built genuine connections, whether you found meaning that was true to who you actually are rather than who you thought you should be. Orochimaru's scar never closed because he never stopped picking at it, never gave it the space and time and vulnerability it needed to heal. Don't make that mistake. Your scars are part of your story, but they don't have to be the whole story. You can acknowledge them, learn from them, and still build something beautiful with your life. The void doesn't have to win. The emptiness doesn't have to be permanent. The immortality that actually matters isn't living forever. It's living fully, authentically, courageously, even knowing that it's all temporary. That's the legacy Orochimaru never built, but you still can. And that's the real psychological lesson hiding underneath all the snake symbolism and body-switching horror. The only way to fill the void is to stop running from it and start sitting with it long enough to understand what it's really trying to tell you about what you need to heal and who you need to become. Now, if you're sitting here thinking, damn, this hit way different than I expected, and you're craving more psychological breakdowns like this, I've got exactly what you need. We've got an entire series diving into the darkest, most complex characters in anime and breaking down what their stories reveal about the human condition. I'm talking about characters who make you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. Like, have you ever wondered why Gaara's isolation resonates so deeply? Or what Itachi's impossible choices reveal about guilt and sacrifice? Or how Pain's philosophy actually reflects real psychological theories about suffering and meaning? Each of these deep dives is designed to do exactly what we just did with Orochimaru, take you beyond the surface-level action and powers and really explore the psychological reality these characters represent. And here's the thing, understanding these characters isn't just about anime. It's about understanding the parts of yourself that you see reflected in them. It's about using fiction as a mirror to examine your own psychology, your own wounds, your own patterns. That's what makes this content different from every other anime channel out there. We're not just talking about who's stronger or ranking the best fights. We're using anime as a tool for genuine self-understanding and psychological growth. So if that speaks to you, if you're tired of surface-level content and you want something that actually challenges you to think deeper and look inward, then you absolutely need to check out our video on Itachi next. Trust me, if Orochimaru's story messed you up, wait until you see what Itachi's psychology reveals about the cost of carrying impossible burdens and living with choices that can never be undone. That video is going to hit you even harder because Itachi represents the other side of trauma. The people who suffer in silence, who sacrifice everything, who carry their pain with grace instead of letting it turn them into monsters. It's the perfect companion piece to this Orochimaru analysis, and together they paint a complete picture of how trauma can take you in completely opposite directions depending on the choices you make. The video is popping up on your screen right now, so click on it and let's continue this journey together. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe because we're building something special here. A community that's not afraid to go deep, to get uncomfortable, to use anime as a tool for real psychological exploration and personal growth. We're dropping new character psychology breakdowns every week, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. We're about to dive into some characters whose psychological complexity is going to blow your mind and maybe even change how you see yourself. So yeah, click that video, join the community, and let's keep exploring the psychology of anime together. Because at the end of the day, these stories aren't just entertainment, they're mirrors reflecting back the deepest parts of who we are, and understanding them might just help us understand ourselves a little better too. Catch you in the next video, fam. Let's go deeper.